And what's so delicious about today is that we're going to be going into seemingly good qualities that we perceive that is actually beneficial for us, but they actually are ego traps that keep us in our pain. And so that's what today is going to be so delicious, because you're going to have an existential crisis, hopefully. That's my goal. That you leave here in tears. No, it's not going to be that bad. It's just going to be one of those things where it's going to make you think about things. It's going to make you pause. It's going to make you process. It's going to hopefully shift things up to where you might start being a little bit more aware in how you're responding to the conflicts of life, but also the things that you might be priding yourself in, the positive qualities about yourself. You're just like, what is it? I posted that photo where it's this monk meditating, and he's just like, there's no such thing as the I, it's all ego. And then it like goes a couple more comics, and at the end he's just like, I'm so freaking enlightened. So it's that mentality that we sometimes get attached to in these spiritual circles and self-help, where we like take these steps forward in recognition of the ego, in recognition of the duality, but then we take these steps back, or maybe we just remain stagnant in our own pride, in our own ego, and then we actually start utilizing spirituality or self-help as a means to isolate ourselves, as a means to judge other people. You know, a lot of people come to here coming actually from a religion that they felt was very constrictive, but then all of a sudden you get on this new spirituality bandwagon, and then what do you start doing? You start judging the people that you just came from, or you start to just judge anyone who has a different belief system from you, thinking that you somehow know more than them. And you feel so aware, you're self-aware, and if only everyone was self-aware, you just get caught in this cycle. And so we're really going to dig deep into that today, with a few other things. So I'm so excited, and thank you all for being here. We are going to have such a fun adventure. When I laugh like that, you know it's good. Okay, so shall we jump in then? I think there's a lot to cover, so we'll just jump into things today. So yes, a mindfulness seminar. We do these once a month, last week of every month, so just kind of put those on your calendar, because these mindfulness seminars is when I talk about more edgy topics, while all the other Sundays is Living Peace study groups, which through the end of summer are free to attend, and we just go through the different teachings from my book, Mastery of Thought, Mastery of Impulse, Mastery of Emotion, Seeing Beyond the Three Illusions of Life, and then learning how to release the 3 attachments of life. And that is just a fun, it's more an interactive experience where you hear a lot from the students, and then you can ask questions, and it's just fantastic because everyone here is just so knowledgeful. And that is what we'll be doing next week. But for now, mindfulness seminar. What did I call it today? Shredding the ego? Yeah. Buckle up, buttercups. So, who wants to throw out there, if you want, you don't have to, I could answer for you, but what is the traditional belief of what ego is? Any thoughts on that? When you hear ego, what is the first thing that pops into your mind?
Negativity.
Negativity? Good. What else?
Control.
Control. Good. What else?
Someone who's pompous.
Someone who's pompous. Normally it's arrogance, isn't it? You kind of get into that arrogant, the narcissist that is very controlling, and that can be very negative and dominating. And so what's interesting is that traditionally we think of the ego as being this arrogance, and a lot of people don't want to be seen as egotistical, so they actually then start berating themselves. They belittle themselves, then we swing in the opposite direction of ego, which is self-pity, which is criticizing yourself, the negativity of anything, comparing yourself to others, but also, most importantly, tearing yourself down. And so that is also ego. But that's not necessarily something new that we're teaching today. So what is ego? My new definition of ego is simply the neurosis of the mind. So just write that down. Ego is the neurosis of the mind. And I'll go ahead and define neurosis for you in a second. So neurosis is something, to some degree, all of us struggle with. It is that obsessive thinking about something. Normally it leads to overwhelming stress, it leads to overwhelming anxiety, insecurity. It can even lead to that anger, where you're just pick. So it's just that hamster wheel in the mind. That is the neuroses that we're talking about. And that's been my latest favorite word. Not to label, but when you know what something is, you have to acknowledge it for you to actually heal it. And so ego is the neurosis of the mind, the part of ourselves that falls into obsessive and guilt or blame-ridden thoughts. Because you'll notice it's either going to be internally, which is full of guilt, all these thoughts that you just keep beating yourself up again and again and again and again, or it's going to turn externally, which is the blame, where you're constantly picking apart other people, blaming them for your misfortune, and it's just so full of judgment. So you have the yang element, the yang element, which is blame, and then you have the yin element, which is internalizing that guilt. So that's something really cool to write down. So you have yin, that is guilt, and yang, that is blame. Yang and blame, kind of rhymes, I like that. So those are the two flip sides of the same coin. And if you know that if you're not feeling good, it could be any type of negative emotion, you're going to be caught up in one of those things. You're either internalizing it as feeling bad about something, or you're externalizing it about projecting some type of anger, frustration, impatience at someone or something. Isn't that cool? So that's how you start to know that you're in a neurosis way of thinking, which is the ego. And so, yes, we have the obsessive thoughts that are guilt or blame-ridden that lead to negative emotions and states of being such as depression, stress, anxiety, anger, and fear. Ego is also what shuts us down and keeps people, aka kindness, away. Very good. So this lovely morning that I awoke in and we had our coffee together. So I'm just going to say fiancé a lot because it's been, tomorrow is 1 week we've been engaged, so I'm a bit strucken with love. So he's like, well, what about happy emotions? Can't the ego lead to happy emotions? And then we have this beautiful discussion, and the truth is, yes and no, that's a half-truth, because what the interesting thing of what inner peace is all about is we're looking to cultivate inner peace, we're looking to cultivate joy, and we're looking to cultivate unconditional love. Those three things are void of ego. Because if you have any ego stuck in you that you're thinking about someone or something or about yourselves, those three things are going to be compromised. You're going to notice you don't have inner peace. You're going to notice your love is conditional towards those that you're thinking about, especially probably towards yourself. And that joy, just that everyday waking up feelings of joy is not going to be there. Because there is those ego attachments, which were those ego traps that we're going to go into in a little bit. That's how you know that you're caught in an ego trap. But things like excitement, things like happiness, those type of emotions that are more temporary, that don't necessarily well up from within you, because I always say joy comes from within while happiness comes from without. Like an external thing that happened outside and you all of a sudden have this burst of happiness, you have this burst of excitement. But what follows those bursts?
They come down.
They come down, yeah. And so there's normally this fall. And when you're even in those excitements, think about you're excited for a job interview, or you just started dating someone, you have all this excitement, you have this euphoria, you have this ecstasy. Is it normally ridden with anxiety? Is there a little bit of stress there? Is there a little bit of insecurity? So it's interesting that we have this excitement, we have this exhilaration, but it's not necessarily peaceful. Thich Nhat Hanh always says excitement is not peace. Excitement is not peace. And so this is something I've really had to internalize, because with Zen philosophy, we're really taught to live in the present moment. But what ends up happening is I just get so darn excited about the future, and I start planning things, and then all of a sudden, I'm not actually in the present anymore, and I'm thinking about these future things, and then all of a sudden I start thinking about, well, why aren't they here yet? And then I get a little bit upset, I get a bit nervous, I just start to create all of these stories in my mind of what is yet to come, that then makes me feel a little bit worse about my current circumstances. Who's done that before? That is neurotic thinking, where you're projecting into the future. Or who's been on a few dates with someone before, and then you just start to visualize what it would be like to actually be in a relationship with them. No, do not do that. Because you're then all of a sudden creating these stories that aren't actually real. And so I just love that, because the ego can't provide lasting happiness or peace, because whenever you're caught up in a story, you're deriving your emotional well-being from some type of story, rather than actually the present moment. When you're fully in the present moment, you're actually having inner peace, you're having unconditional love, you're not adding stories, and thus there's this inner peace. You're not having these emotional storytelling, just picking apart life to make yourself feel better, because sometimes we do project ourselves into the future because our now sucks. Who's done that before? You're just like, surely hope is a good thing to think about. But all of a sudden, when you're so putting yourself in the future, you may not actually be dealing with your current circumstances with full responsibility and full discipline. So we talked about that a few weeks ago, how sometimes the thinking of a situation, the high, is actually more fulfilling than actually showing up and doing it, because when you show up and do it, people disappoint you. And so a lot of times we'll just get stuck telling things that we're going to do in life, but we don't actually ever follow through doing it, because subconsciously we're just like, it's so much happier just being in this bubble, you know, in my head, and just everything works out when I envision it. But then when I actually have to be around people, oh God, that sometimes occurs. So yes, it's very important to differentiate that happiness and external stimuli that lead to excitement. There is still some ego traps in there. And what we're really looking to go into is the inner peace, the unconditional love, and the joy of everyday living. And that's what Zen masters teach us. So you can also write this down. Alignment is happiness. Alignment is happiness. But what is alignment? Alignment is literally being fully in the present moment, looking at life just as it is. Because if we're attaching to some external stimuli, it's going to drop that. You're going to have that pendulum swing. That alignment is, maybe some of you have meditated before, and you have actually gotten to that point where maybe there's that stillness of mind and there's no more storytelling going on, and you're just right there in that zone. Maybe you've been in nature. That's probably the best example, because we've all tried meditation, but sometimes it leads to some difficulties. But when you're in nature, you can't help but drop into that mode, or when you're hiking, you just kind of get into that zone. Some people feel that when they're working out. Sometimes people may feel that when they're creating music or art. You know that feeling I'm talking about, where you just kind of zone out and there's nothing really going on in your mind except what's in front of you. That's what we're talking about. That's alignment. And that's that feeling that we want to start cultivating on a daily basis in all things that we do. And that is something that can be achieved, I promise you, but it takes a lot of work. It takes discipline training, it takes mentorship, things like that. It's not one of those things where you just read it once and then you're a master of it. I just love that. Let me do a side tangent, damn it. We read all these self-help books, we go to these classes, we do all these things, and then we think that just by reading a book or watching a video or just even just one or a couple sessions, we think that it's going to lead to these amazing results, but what ends up happening is no, it's a daily lifestyle that you actually have to cultivate and to live if you really want to see amazing changes. You know, you think about it, if you're going to train your body, you're gonna have to learn to master your eating. You're gonna have to learn to be able to go 3 to 5 times a week and start exercising, moving, getting the stagnancy out of your body. Because a lot of times we get stuck in that sedentary lifestyle, especially sometimes because of our jobs now. We're not all chopping wood or working in the coal mine these days. We're actually at cubicles, or we work at home, and there's not necessarily a lot of movement in our lives. So why do we know that with the body we actually have to get it to move, but we don't attribute it to the actual mind? Isn't that curious? And so that is where that self-discipline stuff comes. And that's why I tell, if students want to see the best results, yeah, an hour a week with me is great, but come to the Wednesdays, come to the Sundays, come to the, make every day something that you do for an hour, and that's what's actually going to shift your mind. It may not be here, it might be your own routine. Isn't that cool? I literally have helped someone go from major addiction to 0 cravings at all in less than 6 months. But it wasn't necessarily just me, it was this person, because they did something every single night, and they meditate 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night. So they completely changed their lifestyle around, and that actually led them to not having a single craving. That is huge, and if any of you have actually struggled with addiction, you know that is huge. But at the same time, what is different with them versus everyone else is simply that they actually made it part of their living, breathing reality. Does that make sense? So if you find yourself constantly going up and down, struggling a lot, it's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just simply that discipline, that discipline of mind, body, and spirit may not necessarily be there. / end rant. Okay. So the ego creates the stories and we then feel the emotions. This is why Zen is so critical, because Zen is the observation of reality as it is without the additions of emotional storytelling. So you can write that down. Zen equals observation of reality as it is. Zen equals observation of reality as it is. Now, as Westerners here, that sucks, because we are just brought up from a young age that everything has a story to it. You have to assume things, you have to guess things. I mean, we have reality shows just all based around that, where there's always something happening. While in the East, traditionally, in certain spiritual paths or philosophical paths, there really is that ability to train your mind to just, when you're drinking tea, that's all you're doing, you're drinking tea. But here in the West, we've trained like micromanaging is a good thing. And the more you micromanage, the more productive and successful and happy you're going to be. But then you go 20 years doing it and you realize it has not helped you damn bit. It just has created insanity in your mind, and then every now and then this monster comes out, this box of crazy opens, and you scare the shit out of your loved ones. Hashtag true story. And that's why Zen practice is so important, and many people in the spiritual circles, they're just like, I like that Buddha guy, he's pretty cool. Or, you know, we'll go to yoga, you know, we'll try meditation and stuff, but we don't actually dig into the roots of Zen philosophy. That literally means if you are not present washing the dishes, you are dead in that moment. You are not alive in those moments when you're walking and you're not aware that you're walking. When you're washing dishes, you're not aware that you're washing dishes. When you're talking to someone but you're on your phone, you're not ever fully present. And so that was the biggest aha moment for me. I've said that multiple times here before, but when you are washing dishes, one of my favorite things to do, all you want to think about, especially if it's something you don't enjoy doing, you're thinking about something else. But if you think about something else, rather than doing what is right in front of you, you're not alive in that moment, and then all of a sudden 20 years go by and you're just like, where the hell did the time go? Well, it's because I wasn't actually present living each and every moment. Isn't that beautiful? And this is something you can start cultivating in your daily relationships, making sure you're having that eye contact no matter what you're doing. When you're talking to someone, give them your undivided presence, even if it is just for 15, 20 minutes. When someone feels unloved from you, it's not because there's a lack of love, it's because there's a lack of undivided attention. Oh, it's so good. Okay, we're getting on to the actual bulk of what this has all just been built up. Okay, so every person improves when they shift their stinky thinking. So why do they so often go back? So we learn this stuff, right? But why do we end up going backwards? You know, we get into this routine, it's awesome, but then there's always these few step backs that we take. Why? We can say because it's easier, it's learned and familiar behavior, but most of all it's because we fall into the ego traps. That's my personal perception of that. It's because we fall into these ego traps that we don't realize are ego traps. And ego traps represent, I don't like saying wrong or positive, but simply you could put in quotations, wrong perception. Because that is important to realize, that it's not aligned perception. That's a soft way of saying that. An ego trap is simply, quotes, wrong or not aligned perception about something, where you think you're doing something that's beneficial for you, but it's actually the very thing that's the detriment to your inner peace. And thus it keeps us trapped in emotional turmoil and makes us take the steps backwards. And here are the 4 that we're going into today. This is new material for everyone, even the students in our program. And so go ahead and make 4 bullet points. And the first one is self-reliance. What a beautiful word. We think it's positive. It is and it isn't. It's a half-truth. The second one is self-love. Who knew that could be a trap? The third one is compassion. This is probably one that every single one of you in this room has done at some point or another. And the fourth one is spirituality itself. Spirituality. Self-reliance, self-love, compassion, spirituality, such happy words. But they are the very things that sometimes get you trapped in stagnancy and in emotional pain. So let's start with self-reliance. And these are all things I've coached people on and seen students and clients and even myself go through on different occasions. So this is some really juicy stuff. So self-reliance. Rather than empowerment, when we start going down that road, rather than empowerment, we feel even more alone. Who's felt more isolated when you actually go down this path of trying to become less codependent on the world? We end up going from super codependence to then just blocking everyone off. I always love those, it's kind of like, I'm just dating myself for a year. I don't need anyone or anything. That is so not healthy. So we go from, jumping from relationship to relationship to relationship, but then all of a sudden it's just like nothing at all. I'm just blocking out all help from anyone and everyone. And I love that because a lot of times that comes from the perception I'm working things out on my own, and I have to do it on my own. And secondly, I don't want to be a burden on anyone. Those two perceptions are the, quote, wrong perceptions. I have to do it myself, and I don't want to be a burden. And obviously, when those things by themselves are the yin and the yang elements, they don't sound that bad. They sound like, yeah, you're trying to be tough. You're trying to take back your power. And, you're trying to have compassion for other people because you don't want to be a weight on them with your own boxes of crazy. But at the same time, the issue with this reality that we live in is that we are human. And the reason that we evolved into this dominant species of awesomeness is because we have that ability to work together, to be in harmony, to have these communities. And so every single person, there's very few people I have ever met that have been able to achieve enlightenment by themselves. Normally they achieve enlightenment when they're together in a community working together. Even the Zen monks that go up into the mountains, they teach this too because they have their Sangha, which is a word for community. It's the brothers and sisters of the practice. And so I strongly believe that the reason why neurosis is increasing here in the West is because communities are at an all-time low. We have just completely separated ourselves from our families. Granted, some of our families are crazy. But back in the day, we used to all be in the same town. We used to be able to support each other. And maybe the reason why some of our families get more crazy is because we get isolated from each other and we don't have that support that we need. If you would eventually had a child, up the street or even in the same house, you had your grandparents, you had 3 to 4 generations of people all living together, working together. And it was so much easier to propel yourself forward in life. Now, we are all isolated in these little pockets everywhere around the world that we don't have that support. And then obviously religious and spiritual communities are still on the decline because we don't like that duality anymore. We don't like that judgment. But at the same time, we separate ourselves and then we no longer have that amazing community involvement, and then addiction starts to take over because we don't have that support system. We feel so isolated and alone. And that's so curious that this is such a huge issue that we could be in a city surrounded by millions of people, but sometimes we'll feel like we're the only ones there. I hear this from every single person at one point in their lives. Even in marriages, you can feel alone. It is incredible the extent of aloneness that is happening on this planet, and a huge reason that it keeps perpetuating is because we're not being vulnerable. We're not being transparent. We're not taking that step going into places like this that exist, because there's plenty of them. If you want to be part of a community, it doesn't have to be this one, it could be something else, or creating it yourself. That's what I decided to do. I felt so alone for so many years of my life that no one understood me, and I just said, F it, I'm just going to create it, and then here we are. So it's one of those things that we think self-reliance, and that was a huge issue of mine growing up. Self-reliance is such a positive thing that you have to do it by yourself. But that is the very thing that is going to keep you trapped, and it's going to keep you feeling isolated, and it's going to keep you feeling depressed. You can't do this alone. And that's one thing I want you to really think about. You have to have that support system. You have to reach out. You have to ask for help. It is not weakness to ask for help. It is not weakness to reach out. It's not weakness to want to be in a relationship. It's not weakness to want to share your life. So we have to get out of that huge individualistic societal belief that we've just implanted in the back of our minds, thinking that that is the highest happiness, achieving it on your own. Does that make sense? So very, very important to remember. Self-love. Self-love. Rather than inner peace, we feel inner turmoil. Who's tried to bark up the whole self-help tree, or I mean the self-love tree? I think we've all at some point where you're just like, oh, I realize I don't love myself. But then you work on it, work on it, work on it. There's no progress being made. You just judge yourself more and more and more and more. And then now that you have this self-awareness, you're just like, now I'm aware that I'm judging myself. And now I hate myself for judging myself for judging myself. And it just becomes this like loop of insanity. And then you just cry a lot. Oh my God, my life story. So it's fascinating that this happens. And what I often like to say, so with self-reliance, it becomes self-avoidance. But with self-love, it becomes self-persecution. And we start to develop hostility towards ourselves the more that we work on that self-love. And the thoughts that we start to think is, I'm not worthy. And most importantly, people are better off without me. That is so huge. That is your, quote, wrong perception that is keeping self-love away. People are better off without me. My partner would be better off without me. My community would be better off without me. My family would be better off without me. So you go from like, I don't want to be burdened on anyone, and then you start to think, oh, I mean, I'm just such a hot mess that people would be better off without me. So we don't have this community of support, and then when we try to work on our own self-reliance, then we try to work on our self-love, we just get deeper and deeper and deeper into our pits of despair based off of these wrong perceptions. That just really hurt us and keep us in those ego traps. But all the while we're unaware of it because we think I'm just being self-reliant, I'm trying to do this myself, and I'm just trying to really work on my self-love. All the while those subconscious beliefs are still there. So we're not actually tackling the root of them. As I often like to say, if you want to get self-love and alignment, you have to work on your inner peace. Don't focus so strongly on the love part. Work us on the peace part of what we spent that whole beginning rant on, of being able to get to that place of neutral mindedness. You don't have to go from 0 to 60 in the love scale. Just get to that place of that middle, of that neutrality, of doing what you can each and every day to either recondition those thoughts or at least still them momentarily. We'll go more into that in a little bit. But isn't that cool? Isn't that cool that the very essence of observing self-love, it actually becomes the creator of greater hostility towards yourself. It becomes the creator of greater judgment towards yourself. And then this is my favorite, which I think we're all a little bit guilty of. Compassion. Which on Wednesday I gave an awesome talk in my Practical Buddhism class on bravery. But compassion, rather than bravery, we give excuses. Compassion, you observing yourself as a compassionate person, is one of the leading factors of what provides you with excuses not to deal with your shit. Because you say stuff like, I just don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Or maybe they're just not going to understand, so I'm just not going to create waves, I'm just not going to talk about it. Or I don't like saying no to people. They just look so happy. I don't want to bring anything up today. Or finally have a week without fighting. So you create all these like stories of trying to create and keep peace in your relationships, but then nothing ever gets talked about. You never actually fully address the issues. So you are using compassion as a scapegoat to not deal with your stuff, to not have those difficult conversations that will propel your relationship into the next stage of conscious evolution, the next stage of emotional equilibrium. Oh. My favorite one too is, they're just so old, they won't ever change their ways. We get that a lot from young bucks, young does and bucks especially. It's just like, as a gay man, I hear so many of my fellow people my age that just don't want to tell their parents, or they don't want to tell their grandparents because they don't want to ruin their belief system about their perfect child. And so they don't want to hurt their emotions and their feelings for being their authentic self. And that, yes, it might cause some turmoil, but when you don't be transparent, it could be anything, it doesn't have to be the whole gay thing, it could be literally anything about your authentic self, of who you really are. It could even just be an interest. It could be, I don't want to do that, I want to do this, because how often do we get into that people-pleasing mode? And we just never give other people the opportunity to love who we are for who we are. And so we just wear this mask forever and always because we think we're being compassionate and we're looking out for other people's emotions. But then for the rest of your life, you're living a half lie, aren't you? And that just eats away at your soul. And so it's never a good excuse to go into the thing where I don't want to hurt their emotions, I don't want to cause further waves. You have to be willing to rock the boat a little bit if you actually want to be able to actually cross the sea. If you want to cross the sea to enlightenment, you have to get ready. There's going to be some storms, and you have to be okay with that. But you can still come at it from a place of peace. You can still come at it from a place of kindness. And that's one thing I have to tell you is that there's nothing wrong about you. And so when you have something to share, it's important that you give yourself permission to be able to share it. Yes, if you're really caught in your ego and if you want to shout anger at someone, that's not exactly what I'm saying. But you can still say, once you find your peace, once you find your stability, you can say, you know, this really triggered me. You know, this really hurt. And I'd like to have an opportunity to talk to you about this. Or, you know, this is something I really don't want to go in this direction in my life. And I know this is going to disappoint you because you have high hopes for me. But this is really what my passion is. Can we talk about this? Because one thing as humans we do, we put so many expectations on our loved ones, and it just eats them apart. Right? Who's felt an expectation from a loved one? Who still puts expectations on your loved ones, even though you felt expectations from your loved ones? See that little twisty game we play? Really important to think about. Compassion. So compassion often leads you to self-validation, which is no bueno, because you're validating your reasons not to communicate by saying it's good. But what's happening is you're not actually being brave. And the last one, which is a doozy, spirituality. Yep, if you're all here, you probably are spiritual to some extent. Even if you're an atheist, you probably still have that whole humanitarianism thing going on for you, which can be considered self-righteous, or self-righteous spiritual. So spirituality leads to that self-righteousness. That is the biggest issue with spirituality. Rather than kindness, we give judgment. Spirituality is your gateway to being self-righteous. One of my favorite quotes that actually Anderson turned me on to was by the Dalai Lama. He said, the world can live without religion and meditation, but it can't live without kindness. The world can live without religion and meditation, but it can't live without kindness, without affection. And so that's the curiosity that religion and meditation, all these disciplines, really what their purpose is to refine kindness, to give us more ability to be kind, to give us more ability to be especially kind to ourselves, to be more affectionate towards those that we love, to be more present. But that's the issue, is that we think spirituality is about just growing ourselves consciously and becoming all this self-aware, that we then start to separate ourselves from everyone that actually could benefit from our alignment. Isn't that curious? So then this is one thing I really watch out for with the students. We learn about vibration, right? And then all of a sudden we're just like, oh, they're low vibration, I don't want to be around them anymore. And I have been guilty of saying those things before. And so I learned to eliminate that word, even vibration, from my vocabulary and just look at people as people. And if I don't feel great being around them, then I just don't be around them that often. But I don't need to add a story to it, because then I'm judging them, and I'm actually self-righteousing myself and saying I'm somehow further along and more intelligent than they are. You see how we get into that game where we just, then it gets back into, then it repeats the cycle back into isolation. No one understands me. I'm just so aware and no one else is. We do that. We play that game. It may not be with the world as a whole, but we certainly do that with our family. And so when we do that, we may not actually be taking the steps to communicate with our loved ones. We give up on the people in our lives without even giving them a chance. Ooh, write that down. We give up on people in our lives without even giving them a chance. We make up our minds for them. And again, that's the very heart of storytelling. That's the heart of assumption making. And that's what we're really trying to transcend, is the neurosis of our mind to just be so addicted to this behavior, this obsessive behavior of just going and going and going and going, and you have a weird interaction with someone, and then you're thinking about that interaction after you have that interaction, and then you're picking it apart and thinking, oh, maybe they don't like me, or oh, maybe they have this thought. All of that you don't need to even do, because then you're on to a new present moment, and you don't even have to think about it, because that's now the past. But if you're thinking about it, you're not actually in the present anymore, and you're not actually progressing much. I know I've done that a lot. Holy hot damn. Whew. So, spirituality, rather than kindness, we give judgment. Yeah. And we become self-righteous. Good stuff. And so what are these for when they're in alignment? I mentioned them briefly, but what are these for when they're actually in alignment? Self-reliance is empowerment. When you're actually doing it in its correct mode, you feel empowered. You feel energized. You're cultivating a disciplined lifestyle and spiritual practice. It'll make you feel more connected to others. Self-love will bring you inner peace. Like I said, don't try so hard with the self-love, because the more you think about it, the worse you're going to feel. But if you focus on other areas of your life that you can just be present with and just show up for that day, you're going to notice your peace starts to expand. Or you can read Live in Peace, plug, available on Amazon, by Alaric Hutchinson. But again, reading it once, why won't that help you? It will not help you. You're just like, oh my God, there's so much wisdom, and it's these nuggets, and I highlighted this and that, and then you put it down and never think about it again. That's not a spiritual discipline, is it? That's not a practice, is it? So if you want to see results, you have to develop a practice. That's where peace comes from. It's not this unlocking experience that you just have this aha moment, and never again you have to meditate. It's not how this works. Compassion, we've already said, is bravery. Showing up, listening even when it hurts to hear what someone is saying. Showing up when it's uncomfortable and it's painful. Having those difficult conversations. Not sweeping things under the rug. That is true compassion. I respect people so much when they say, Alaric, I have a problem with you. Can we talk about it? I'll be like, of course. Thank you so much for telling me, rather than disappearing and never talking to me again. Isn't that called ghosting? I think that's what the young kids are saying these days. You just ghost on someone. Not helpful. And then guess what? When you ghost on someone, you're going to then repeat the process again and again and again, and nothing ever gets learned. You're not dealing with your shit. That is not compassion. Oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I'm just not going to talk about it or not talk about them again. Holy shit, no. That is you self-justifying your own lack of alignment. And it's self-justifying your own cowardice. Don't want to say that word, but it's a one we have to really honor, that when we're not dealing with our shit, that is cowardice. So in Chögyam Rinpoche, in his book Shambhala, teaches that it's the path of the warrior. That is the path of bravery. So we're all able to be warriors in our everyday life, not for war, but for peace. And that means showing up even when it hurts, even when we don't want to. Holy shit, that's what's going to help you get to inner peace. Inner peace will never come as long as you're avoiding stuff. Oh, write that down. That puts things in perspective. And last but not least, it doesn't matter what religion or lack of religion you are, kindness at the end of the day, that is your spiritual practice. That is your spiritual practice. And the religion or what you believe in, what God, what not God, doesn't matter what, if it's the force, whatever it is, that is there to help you refine your peace and refine your kindness. If it is not doing that, find a new one. Because I tell people, it cracks me up. You know, I get people who are very religious, and they're in so much pain because of their religion. And they don't want to look at anything beyond that because that's just what they know. But at the same time, if you were born in Asia or the Middle East, you're going to have a different religion. So it's more about where you're born and who your parents were than actually it necessarily being right for you. And so that's why it's important here at ESC that we really study all the world religions and see what is most fitting to you that can cultivate that inner peace and that kindness. Because it's not a cookie cutter thing. Not one thing will fit everyone. Not even my teachings are going to fit everyone. And so it's really important to recognize that religion and spirituality is about cultivating that kindness. And if it's not doing that job, maybe you're misinterpreting the texts, or maybe it's time to look within and find something that is going to really bring about that shift within yourself that can then benefit your family, that can then benefit your communities, that can then benefit the world. Hot damn, that's some good stuff. Makes sense? So breathe that in. True story. Thank you.